One early autumn morning, the lifeless body of Melissa Porter was discovered in her car, parked on a secluded road just outside town. Melissa, a local kindergarten teacher beloved by many, had gone missing 2 days prior, leaving behind a worried husband and a community in shock. James Porter, Melissa's husband, was the first to report her missing. James, a mild-mannered accountant, had been frantic with worry, his anxiety evident in the tremor of his voice when he spoke to the police. The discovery of Melissa's body turned his worst fears into a nightmarish reality. Alongside James, 2 other men, Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark, soon came under the scrutiny of the investigation. Both had been intimately involved with Melissa, each harboring deep and complex feelings for her. Detective Sarah Davis, a seasoned investigator with a sharp mind and an unyielding determination for justice, was assigned to the case. As she delved into Melissa's life and the relationships that entwined her with James, Michael, and Joe, it became clear that beneath the surface of this seemingly straightforward case lay a labyrinth of secrets and betrayals. The story of Melissa Porter's demise was not just a tale of a tragic death, but of a tangled web of love, deceit, and vengeance. It was a crisp morning when Officer Tom Harris received a call about an abandoned vehicle on the outskirts of Oakwood. As he approached the scene, the sight of Melissa Porter's car sent a chill down his spine. The car was parked haphazardly, one wheel on the gravel shoulder, the other on the grassy verge. The windows were fogged, and the faintest hint of a foul odor wafted through the air. Harris peered through the driver's window and recoiled. Melissa Porter was slumped over the steering wheel. Her skin was pallid, and a faint trickle of blood had dried on her temple. The immediate cause of death was not apparent, but the scene suggested foul play. The small community of Oakwood buzzed with shock and sorrow as news of the discovery spread. Melissa had been missing for 48 hours, and her friends and family had clung to hope that she would return unharmed. Now that hope was cruelly dashed. James Porter was inconsolable, his grief magnified by the public scrutiny he now faced. He had been the one to report Melissa missing, and now he was thrust into the center of a murder investigation. Detective Sarah Davis arrived at the scene, her expression grim. She meticulously inspected the car and the surrounding area, noting the lack of defensive wounds on Melissa's body and the absence of a struggle. This suggested she might have been unconscious or incapacitated before her death. A preliminary examination revealed traces of a powdery substance on the passenger seat, which would later be identified as a potent sedative. Davis ordered the car to be towed to the forensic lab for a thorough examination and instructed her team to canvass the area for witnesses. The investigation had just begun, but the pressure to find answers was immense. The community wanted justice for Melissa, and the police were determined to provide it. The Oakwood Police Department quickly mobilized to investigate Melissa Porter's death. Detective Davis spearheaded the effort, her no-nonsense attitude setting the tone for the team. The first order of business was to question James Porter, whose proximity to the victim made him an initial person of interest. James was brought in for questioning at the station. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. Detective Davis began with routine questions about his relationship with Melissa, their recent activities, and his whereabouts during the time she was missing. James explained that he and Melissa had been married for 5 years, a seemingly happy couple in the eyes of the community. He recounted the night Melissa disappeared. She had left the house around 7 p.m., claiming she needed to run some errands. When she didn't return, he grew worried and called the police the next morning. Davis noted his demeanor, searching for signs of deception. James provided an alibi, stating he was home watching TV that night. He offered to let the police verify his story with their home security system's footage. Davis made a mental note to follow up on this lead. As the interview progressed, another name surfaced: Michael Reynolds. According to James, Michael was a close friend of Melissa's, someone she had known for years. James admitted he had always felt a bit uneasy about their relationship, but had no concrete reason to suspect anything untoward. Detective Davis decided to pay Michael a visit. Michael Reynolds, a tall man in his early 30s with an air of easy confidence, welcomed the detectives into his home. He seemed genuinely distraught upon hearing of Melissa's death, insisting they had been just friends. However, his nervous fidgeting suggested there might be more to the story. The investigation widened to include Joe Clark, a local artist who had been seen with Melissa on numerous occasions. Joe, in his mid-40s, was known for his brooding temperament and reclusive lifestyle. He was less forthcoming than Michael, evading direct questions and offering vague, cryptic responses. Detective Davis sensed that both Michael and Joe were hiding something. The threads of Melissa's life began to unravel, revealing a woman who was far more complex and enigmatic than anyone had realized. With each interview, the investigation grew more convoluted, and the stakes became higher. The truth about Melissa's death was buried beneath layers of secrets, and it was up to Davis to dig them out. Melissa Porter was born and raised in Oakwood, a town she loved and never wanted to leave. She was known for her warm smile and her ability to connect with people, traits that made her an excellent kindergarten teacher. Her marriage to James was seen as a match made in heaven, though those closest to her knew there was more beneath the surface. Melissa met James at a charity event 5 years ago. James, an accountant with a stable job and a kind heart, seemed like the perfect partner. They married within a year, and for a while their life together appeared idyllic. But over time, Melissa began to feel restless. The routine of married life left her yearning for something more. Enter Michael Reynolds. Michael and Melissa had been friends since high school. Their bond had always been strong, and there were times when their friendship seemed to border on something deeper. Michael, a charming and successful entrepreneur, offered Melissa the excitement and passion she felt was missing from her marriage. Their relationship, while initially platonic, soon evolved into a secret affair. Melissa found herself torn between the security James provided and the thrill she experienced with Michael. Her feelings for Michael were intense, but they also brought complications and guilt. Then there was Joe Clark. Joe was a local artist, known for his moody paintings and reclusive nature. Melissa met Joe at an art exhibition a year before her death. Joe was different from both James and Michael. He was mysterious and brooding, qualities that fascinated Melissa. Their connection was immediate, and it wasn't long before Melissa found herself involved with Joe as well. Melissa's relationships with Michael and Joe were known only to a few close friends, and she took great pains to keep them hidden from James. However, managing these affairs became increasingly difficult, and Melissa's life grew more complicated. She loved each of these men in different ways, and each offered her something unique. But she also knew that this web of love and deceit could not last forever. As Detective Davis delved deeper into Melissa's background, she discovered a woman who was passionate and vibrant but also deeply conflicted. Melissa's need for connection and excitement had led her down a dangerous path, one that ultimately ended in her untimely death. With Melissa's body discovered and her secret life beginning to surface, suspicion naturally fell on James Porter. Detective Davis scrutinized his alibi, seeking any inconsistencies that might indicate his involvement in his wife's death. James's alibi rested on his claim that he was at home the night Melissa disappeared, watching TV, and later falling asleep on the couch. The home security footage confirmed that James had not left the house during the critical hours. However, Davis was not entirely convinced. She knew that alibis could be fabricated or manipulated. The state of the Porters' marriage became a focal point of the investigation. Friends and neighbors painted a picture of a couple that appeared happy, but had their share of issues. Financial records showed that the Porters were struggling with debt, a potential motive for James to want his wife out of the picture. Life insurance policies on Melissa further added to the suspicion, though the amounts were not exorbitant. James's demeanor during questioning was another point of concern. While his grief seemed genuine, there were moments when his responses were too measured, too controlled. Davis wondered if he was hiding something, or simply trying to protect himself from being wrongfully accused. The most damning piece of evidence was a series of text messages exchanged between James and Melissa in the days leading up to her disappearance. The messages revealed growing tension between them, with Melissa expressing dissatisfaction and James responding with frustration. The arguments, though not overtly violent, indicated a marriage under significant strain. James's interactions with Michael and Joe also raised red flags. Both men admitted to having confrontations with James, who had become increasingly suspicious of their relationships with Melissa. James denied any knowledge of Melissa's affairs, but his anger towards the men was palpable. As the investigation progressed, James Porter remained a prime suspect. His potential motives, financial gain, marital discord, and jealousy, provided enough cause for Detective Davis to keep a close watch on him. However, without concrete evidence linking him directly to the crime, the case against him remained circumstantial. Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark, the two men who had shared intimate relationships with Melissa, were next on Detective Davis's list. Each had their own reasons for wanting Melissa in their lives, and potentially, reasons for wanting her gone. Michael Reynolds, with his charismatic demeanor and successful career, seemed an unlikely suspect at first glance. He had been Melissa's confidant for years, their bond evolving into a romantic relationship that brought both joy and complications. Michael's feelings for Melissa were genuine, but his frustration with her indecision and the secrecy of their affair had caused tension. During questioning, Michael admitted to feeling hurt and betrayed when he discovered Melissa's involvement with Joe, but he vehemently denied having anything to do with her death. Joe Clark was a different story. Known for his brooding personality and artistic temperament, Joe had always been somewhat of an enigma. His relationship with Melissa was intense and passionate, but also fraught with jealousy and possessiveness. Joe's art often reflected his tumultuous emotions, and his interactions with Melissa had been no exception. During his interview, Joe was evasive, his answers tinged with bitterness. He expressed deep sorrow over Melissa's death, but also a lingering resentment towards her for being unable to fully commit to him. Davis noted the contrasts between Michael and Joe, one a polished, successful businessman, the other a moody, introspective artist. Both had motives driven by love and jealousy, and both had been deeply affected by Melissa's actions. The detective also discovered that Michael and Joe had confronted each other on several occasions, their arguments escalating as Melissa's relationships with them became more entangled. The investigation into Michael and Joe's backgrounds revealed more layers to Melissa's story. Each man had been drawn to Melissa's vivacious personality and warmth, but both had also experienced the darker sides of their relationships with her. The complexity of these relationships suggested that Melissa's death was not a straightforward case of jealousy or revenge, but rather a culmination of many conflicting emotions and desires. As Detective Davis continued to unravel the intricacies of Melissa's life and relationships, she realized that the truth was buried deep within a web of passion, betrayal, and hidden motives. The challenge was to untangle these threads and find the one that would lead to Melissa's killer. As Detective Davis dug deeper into the lives of Melissa, James, Michael, and Joe, she began to uncover a series of startling revelations and secrets that painted a clearer picture of Melissa's complex world. The first major revelation came from Melissa's close friend, Laura Mitchell. Laura revealed that Melissa had been confiding in her for months about the struggles in her marriage and the turmoil caused by her relationships with Michael and Joe. Melissa had been feeling increasingly trapped and overwhelmed by the dual pressures of maintaining her marriage and managing her affairs. Laura also mentioned that Melissa had expressed fears about someone stalking her, though she never specified who. This new information prompted Davis to re-examine the evidence with fresh eyes. The possibility of a third-party involvement, someone who knew about Melissa's affairs and had a vested interest in her demise, became a compelling angle. Davis ordered a deeper investigation into Melissa's communications and social media, looking for any signs of threats or suspicious activity. The forensic analysis of Melissa's car provided another crucial piece of the puzzle. Traces of the sedative found in the passenger seat matched a prescription registered to Joe Clark. When confronted with this evidence, Joe's calm facade began to crack. He admitted to having the sedative, but claimed he had no intention of harming Melissa. According to Joe, Melissa had asked him for the sedative to help her sleep, a claim that was difficult to verify. Further complicating the investigation was a discovery in Michael's financial records. Large sums of money had been transferred between Michael's accounts and an unknown third party over the past few months. Michael explained that these were business transactions, but the lack of clear documentation raised suspicion. Davis wondered if Michael might have been involved in some form of blackmail or had hired someone to intimidate Melissa. The pressure on all three men intensified as Davis continued to piece together Melissa's last days. Interviews with neighbors and colleagues revealed that Melissa had been planning to leave Oakwood, possibly to escape the tangled relationships she had found herself in. She had been seen packing boxes into her car and had mentioned to a colleague that she needed a fresh start. Then came the biggest revelation of all, a hidden journal found in Melissa's belongings. The journal contained detailed accounts of her relationships with James, Michael, and Joe, as well as her fears and plans for the future. Melissa wrote about feeling suffocated by James's controlling nature exhilarated by her affair with Michael, and deeply conflicted about her intense connection with Joe. She also mentioned receiving anonymous threats, which she suspected were from someone who knew about her affairs. The journal painted a picture of a woman caught in a web of her own making, desperate to break free but unsure how. It provided Detective Davis with critical insights into Melissa's state of mind and the potential motives of those around her. With this new evidence, Davis felt she was finally closing in on the truth. Just as Detective Davis thought she was getting closer to solving the case, a surprising twist emerged that shifted the focus of the investigation. A new piece of evidence surfaced: a security camera recording from a nearby convenience store that showed Melissa in the company of a man who was neither James, Michael, nor Joe on the night she disappeared. The man in the footage was identified as Daniel Harper, a former colleague of Melissa's from a previous job in a neighboring town. Harper had a checkered past, including a history of violent behavior and a restraining order filed against him by a former girlfriend. The discovery of his involvement with Melissa added a new layer of complexity to the case. Davis brought Harper in for questioning. Harper, a wiry man with a nervous energy, initially denied having seen Melissa recently. However, when confronted with the video evidence, he changed his story. He admitted to meeting Melissa that night, but claimed they had only talked. According to Harper, Melissa had reached out to him because she felt threatened and needed someone to confide in. She had asked Harper to meet her away from Oakwood to avoid being seen by anyone who might know her. Harper's account seemed plausible, but Davis was wary. Harper had a motive: his unrequited feelings for Melissa and his jealousy over her relationships with other men. His past behavior suggested he could be capable of violence, especially if he felt rejected or betrayed. Davis decided to dig deeper into Harper's background and his interactions with Melissa. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of Harper's car revealed traces of the same sedative found in Melissa's vehicle. This new evidence linked Harper directly to the scene of the crime, making him a prime suspect. Harper's story began to unravel under the weight of mounting evidence. He confessed that he had given Melissa the sedative, but insisted it was for her own protection, claiming she had asked for it to calm her nerves. Detective Davis knew that Harper's involvement complicated the narrative, but she also suspected there was more to the story. Harper's account of events didn't entirely align with the evidence. Davis hypothesized that Harper might have been manipulated by someone else, possibly Michael or Joe, to carry out the crime. The idea of a larger conspiracy began to take shape. As Davis continued to press Harper for details, he revealed a startling detail. He had been receiving anonymous payments over the past few months, just like Michael. Harper claimed he didn't know who was behind the payments, but admitted they were meant to ensure his silence about his meetings with Melissa. This revelation pointed to a coordinated effort to keep Melissa's secrets hidden. Davis realized that the investigation had taken a dark turn, one that involved not just a crime of passion, but a calculated plan to silence Melissa permanently. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together, and Davis was determined to uncover the mastermind behind the plot. The investigation took a sinister turn as Detective Davis unraveled the web of deception surrounding Melissa's death. The revelation of anonymous payments and Harper's involvement hinted at a larger, more nefarious plot. Davis now had to consider the possibility that Melissa's death was not just a crime of passion, but a premeditated murder orchestrated by someone with a hidden agenda. Davis's team focused on tracing the source of the payments. Financial records showed a series of transactions funneled through a shell company, eventually leading to an offshore account. The intricate financial trail suggested a high level of planning and resourcefulness, characteristics not typically associated with crimes of passion. This new lead pointed towards someone with significant financial acumen and the means to cover their tracks, potentially Michael Reynolds, given his business background. Davis revisited Michael, armed with the new evidence. Under intense questioning, Michael's confident facade began to crack. He admitted to transferring money to Harper, but insisted it was to help Melissa, not harm her. He claimed Melissa had confided in him about her fears and asked him to arrange for protection, but he had no idea Harper would misuse the funds. Davis was not convinced by Michael's explanation. She suspected that Michael, feeling cornered by Melissa's indecision and the threat of their affair being exposed, had orchestrated a plan to remove her from the equation. However, Michael alone could not have executed such a complex scheme. The involvement of Joe Clark, with his volatile emotions and connection to Melissa, seemed likely. Confronting Joe, Davis presented the evidence of the sedative and the financial transactions. Joe, already unstable, broke down under the pressure. He confessed to being manipulated by Michael, who had convinced him that Melissa was planning to leave both of them and expose their affairs. In a desperate bid to prevent this, Joe agreed to Michael's plan to sedate Melissa and make her disappear. The dark truth emerged. Michael had orchestrated the entire plot, using Joe and Harper as pawns to carry out his plan. Michael's motive was not just jealousy, but a calculated decision to eliminate Melissa and protect his reputation and business interests. Joe, driven by his emotional turmoil, had been an unwitting accomplice, and Harper, lured by money, had played his part without fully understanding the consequences. Davis's investigation had uncovered a chilling conspiracy that highlighted the lengths people would go to protect their secrets and desires. The case was far more complex and darker than anyone had initially imagined, revealing the depths of human deceit and treachery. With the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place, Detective Davis moved swiftly to secure arrest warrants for Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Financial transactions, confessions, and the forensic link between the sedative and Joe. Davis coordinated with her team to ensure that the arrests were conducted smoothly and without incident. Joe Clark was the first to be apprehended. He was found at his studio, surrounded by his hauntingly dark paintings. The arresting officers found him in a state of disarray, his guilt and regret evident. Joe offered no resistance, murmuring apologies and asking about Melissa's final moments. His remorse was genuine, but it could not absolve him of his role in the crime. Michael Reynolds proved more challenging. He had anticipated the arrest and attempted to flee. However, a coordinated effort by the Oakwood Police Department ensured he was apprehended at a private airstrip, trying to board a chartered plane. His arrest was marked by defiance and indignation, maintaining his innocence and accusing the police of fabricating evidence. With both suspects in custody, the prosecution began to build a robust case. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational in Oakwood's history, drawing intense media attention. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, journalists, and those who had known Melissa. The prosecution presented a compelling narrative of manipulation, betrayal, and murder, while the defense tried to paint Michael as a victim of circumstance and Joe as a man driven to desperation. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the extensive evidence and emotional testimonies. Ultimately, both Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and second-degree murder. Michael received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, while Joe, whose genuine remorse and cooperation were considered, was given a reduced sentence of 25 years. Daniel Harper, whose role was more peripheral, was charged with accessory to murder and received a lesser sentence of 10 years. His involvement, though significant, was viewed as being coerced by the primary conspirators. In the end, Oakwood returned to its peaceful existence, but the memory of Melissa Porter and the lessons learned from her case would never be forgotten. Her story remained a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring quest for truth and justice.